My name is Abhay, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Hi everyone. On this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, we share a conversation with author, actress, and activist Sheetal Sheth. Stay tuned. You know, as a pediatrician, it's truly the ultimate privilege to care for kids and their families. I'm always grateful and humbled by my interactions with kids and how much I learn from them with each age and stage. And speaking of grateful and humbled, thank you for listening and for sharing it with your friends and family, for rating and downloading and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, and for following us on social media at Dr. Abhay. So yes, there are certainly the happy moments of keeping kids healthy in body and mind, and there are also the times seeing children and families manage illness, navigating through struggles and loss. I, for one, certainly appreciate any of the vehicles or tools that may allow for strength and comfort in helping in this journey. So it was truly wonderful to catch up with actress, activist, and children's book author Sheetal Sheth. Sheetal is a seasoned and acclaimed actor known for her range and depth of roles in film and television, particularly beginning her career in the 90s where few South Asian Americans were performing and storytelling. Moreover, her work as an ambassador for global literacy and as a children's book author, notably of the popular award-winning Anjali picture book series, which follows an Indian American girl finding her own light while navigating through normal life and tackling gender norms, bullying, and prejudice. The Anjali series recently was picked up by global publisher Penguin Random House. Sheetal's latest book, Making Happy, is a children's book that delves into her own experience battling cancer as the parent of young children, offering a sympathetic and supportive lens of coping with a parent's illness and how they found joy and resilience along the way. Sheetal calls it her love letter to anyone struggling, reflecting on her path through chemotherapy and processing a cancer diagnosis with her own family. We were able to catch up last month to talk about her experiences, and since I have conversations almost daily with children and their families, I was curious about Sheetal's perspective as she was doing author visits at schools and gatherings with groups of young readers.
I love doing them. It's for me like combining all of my favorite things because I love kids, I love writing, I love storytelling. I think with my background as an actress, I'm good at it. In front of a crowd, and I've worked with kids my whole life, so for me it's like all the good things at the same time. So I do hundreds of school visits. I've done hundreds of school visits, and so it's something that I do all the time. And so sometimes at one time there could be like 800 kids in an auditorium, right, or sometimes I could be in a classroom with 20. It just depends how the school breaks it up.
What's been the kind of biggest surprises from these so far? Have there been any sort of like, wow, that's one that I was not prepared for?
I mean, I will say that kids always surprise you. And frankly, like that's what I love about it is the stuff that they think about, what they connect to, the questions they ask. They're always kind of keeping you on your toes, which is amazing. So there's never a time where I leave a school visit and not be kind of floored by something that some child has said. But the thing that I see every time consistently, which is what I like to tell people, and especially adults, is that they like talking about real things. And they are always, or like, thank God, like we can talk about like when you have stories about real things, and not to say that the books about animals and superheroes aren't cool, but when they can actually relate to a character going through a thing and it's a person and not an animal, it connects differently to them. And so, and they're always like, I wish I could talk about this with my parents or with my teachers. And so it's really nice to open that up because they are curious. They're hearing things, this with everything going on in the world, they hear it all and they have a lot of questions. So we should be answering them. They should not be figuring out amongst themselves because you know what happens when that happens. So they need guides. They need adults to kind of help sort through all of the stuff.
How do you separate sometimes your professional hat from your mom hat, or do they just naturally merge when you're interacting in this way?
I mean, I don't know how to separate that because when I'm with
Yeah.
kids, I think of all of them as like my kids, you know,
Yeah.
seriously, like they're
Yeah.
just the sweetest things ever. So
Yeah.
I always think about, I mean, look, I do think that each child is different and you have to meet each child where they are. Obviously, in a setting of like hundreds of kids, I'm not going to know these kids in that way. But I'm pretty good at this point of knowing like where when a question is coming, why it's coming, and trying to kind of meet them at what I think they're asking. I can usually figure out what the question is under the question.
It's a pretty humbling experience in that, and I don't think that adults often walk into those kinds of environments in a situation where they're in fact sort of welcoming the amount of credit that it takes, in fact, to really give kids licensure for that. And you're right, like kids just, they're not only just surprising all the time, but they're far far more savvy about real conversation as opposed to the sort of stuff that's make believe. Have you felt in that way, like some of these humbling moments, especially in the context of now writing several books?
I'm always kind of reminded of the privilege that I have to
Yeah,
obviously I fully believe it's a privilege to create any kinds of kids content because we are shaping the youngest and what I think the most important minds. So I take that very seriously and I take that to heart and I think about what I would want my kids to grow up with and what in the world that I want them to grow into. So I'm really
yeah,
trying to create littles that when their generation gets older that hopefully the world is better than when we left it.
yeah. I imagine that the process of making Happy must have felt slightly different than writing the Anjali series. In some ways, was there a difference, or was it just sort of a natural flow of the next step of expression for you?
You know, it I will say it was different. Well, look, all my books are personal. Obviously, Making Happy is extremely personal and like
Yeah,
right out of my life. And I wrote it actually it came to me in a dream. I woke up and I wrote the book.
yeah,
Obviously, that's not what it ended like it then I made it better.
yeah,
But I woke up with this like pouring out of me in the middle of the night. I wrote down the things that were in my head and then the next day I looked at it and I was like, this is the book. And
yeah,
then I had to figure out what the book was. The book is so personal and I think you do feel my heart in it because the messages that I have been getting from people have been that in the sense of like bringing up so many emotions for different families and to be able to read it with children. The thing that makes me the happiest is what I intended with it, which is really for kids to know that whatever feelings they have is okay
yeah,
and that there's no such thing as inappropriate feelings for a kid. I really don't think that. I think that it's our job to guide and help process what they're going through. And
mm,
telling them to stop feeling a certain way is bad. I mean, you know, this is, in my opinion, very bad
right,
parenting. And we're inadvertently teaching them to suppress their feelings. And we know what happens when that happens.
right,
And so I think giving them tools to get through it is really important. And so there's not kid books that do this that much. And I know
yeah,
that because I was going through a difficult time. I had been diagnosed with cancer. My kids were 2 and 4. And I looked for books that dealt with anything. I said, I went to the store, I was, give me a book about sickness, give me a book about a serious illness, death, anything, grief. And it was really hard to find. And then I
yeah,
reached out to my publishing friends, who I knew many, and I was like, what's the deal? And they're like, yeah, we don't talk about that stuff. I go, what do
yeah,
you mean? This is stuff that we're all dealing with. And so I was really floored at this idea that like they think they're protecting our children and they're not. I mean, our
yeah,
kids have to do lockdown drills. So you're
right,
telling me that we're not able to talk about real things? You got to be kidding me
yeah.
right now, you know? And so for me, the book is about mental health and about being able to give permission to our kids to say whatever's on their mind.
That idea of, a catharsis in this way, right? I mean, did you feel any of that for yourself? This idea that you've gone through so much, this came as sort of an aha and a dream, and now it's sort of an expression of that. Was there some element of, like, real cathartic fulfillment for you also with this?
You know, I had, when the book came out just very recently, a few weeks ago, I had my first big book launch public reading. And
Yeah,
the book, you know, again, it's not an Anjali book. It's not, it's a different type of book. And I
sure.
really like hadn't read it out loud in front of a lot of people ever.
Yeah,
And I thought to myself, I better just like read it to myself a few times because I had a feeling it would be tough for me to get through.
yeah,
And I couldn't get through it. I never got through it once before. I read it I tried many times and I couldn't get through it.
yeah,
And I was like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. And I will say it was hard to get through at my reading. And but I took that as really, I was surrounded by a lot of love, a lot of people in the room that I knew. And I think, again, we went through a collective experience together. And
Yeah.
the book, every character in the book, there are scenes in the book that are named after and taken straight from people in my life that either have been touched by cancer or we lost from cancer. So all of it is so personal to me. So I think that's why.
Yeah.
But I think, again, that's such an important lesson. Like when we talk about, like, a lot of the kids there, when they ask, why did you write this book? Or they talk about their writing and they say it's hard. I'm like, you just write from your heart. And they
Right.
see an example of that.
I'm curious about one thing. How did your own family, your own children respond perhaps when you read it to them for the first time, or they even read it for the first time?
Yeah, it's interesting because, they were so young that they don't really remember. My 2-year-old, who's now 5,
Yeah.
has really no memory of it. I mean,
Right.
she vaguely remembers me with no hair because we talk about that sometimes, but there's no actual memory of that time.
Yeah.
My now 8-year-old, who was 4 at the time, remembers a little, but I think it's because we talk about it.
Yeah.
And then when we read the book, they're like, is that me? They're both like, is that me? And so I feel very grateful to have the book to remind them of a time that we went through, because, again, there's no point in, like, shielding them and, quote,
Right.
protecting them from the world. I think it's made them so much kinder and empathetic and loving. And so I'm fine with them knowing that their mom got sick, but I got better and we all got through it together.
Why is it that you found that there's this dearth and this absence or void of great sort of common literature, or even friendly open books to talk about these kinds of things? Why is it that we fear the idea of things that are painful or anxious, or even questioning mortality or loss for children, or for anyone for that matter, as not a vehicle for more love and more sort of like giving in that way? Why do we think that it's going to have the opposite effect? Why are we fearful of that?
I think it's because adults don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really
It's a
do.
lot of
I think that,
projection.
yeah, I do. I think that they're uncomfortable. I think we are uncomfortable. I think that we don't understand it. I think, it's fascinating because most of again, kids, model behavior, they model feelings. How often do you see a child have what a parent would call a tantrum or a fit? And their immediate response is like, just stop it, just stop it, just stop it, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to what I remember, my daughter's preschool teacher, it sticks in my mind all the time. She said to us, just remember, they are not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time.
Yeah.
And really, that has really helped me. Now, I have my moments, but we all do.
That's
It
right.
really helps frame it, right? Like, our
Yeah.
kids are just going through, like, let's figure out what the heart of why are they feeling that way? And if we approached things like that and taught kids and all of us to approach situations with, like, I wonder what's going on with them, right? Come at it with love.
Yeah.
Imagine how different the world would be.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with author Sheetal Sheth. Stay tuned. Conversation. It's the antidote to apathy and the catalyst for relationships. I'm Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians, so everyone can say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Lily Singh, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Welcome back to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin our conversation with children's book author Sheetal Sheth. We talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences and so much of the kind of innate trauma that so many adults have gone through that now sort of affect how their behaviors are. Has the writing of this book, or even the sort of understanding and appreciation for you of the process of it, even sensing that, has that changed your own sense of parenting and your own instinct in parenting?
As you know, parenting is like on to the job training.
Yeah.
And the learning curve is what it is. Like, you just deal with what happens.
Right.
But I do think it is very instinctual.
Yeah.
And I do think what I have noticed is there's a lot of conditioning that I didn't even realize I had from my upbringing that isn't necessarily serve me or my family now. And so I've really had to rethink things that sometimes I say, I'm like, did I just say that? Or I don't even believe that. Or why am I even doing that? And so
Yeah.
I've really had to rethink a lot of the stuff that has been taught to me, right? With
Yeah.
by no fault of my parents. Also, I also think, like, at least my situation, which many of us have, our parents were immigrants and they were just trying to get through the day. The EQ was not something that they were equipped to kind of
Sure.
guide us through.
Yeah.
And so I think our generation very differently approaches things in a more holistic way.
Yeah.
And so, many of my parents' generation roll their eyes a little bit when I talk about that. But I really do feel like I tell my parents, like, my kids are different. You cannot discipline them the same. You cannot teach them the same. They're different, but it's hard for them to even conceptualize that, because they didn't have those conversations in India,
right.
Nor did they, like, that's not what they were doing, when they were raising their kids.
Yeah, I mean, that was the sort of more silent conversations that they may have been having, but definitely not out in the open. And in that same vein, right, I mean, there's a very important sort of brown or South Asian component to all of this too. Did you find any sort of community among other authors or storytellers of color, particularly in the South Asian community, when you were sort of going through the idea or the concept of even bringing this out in the open?
Well, I think the resounding, even when I was first diagnosed, it was interesting. I mean, I was kind of dealing with my own process of it.
Yeah.
But it was interesting how many, and again, we know this in the South Asian culture, how taboo illness is, mental health, all of those things. And there was a contingent of people that were like, you should really just keep this to yourself.
Why so? You think, like, just again, that same sort of like, hey, this is the way we've always done it.
I think that I joked at the time that, how back in the day, I mean, I know it still happens a little, but like the bio data of a person is what's on paper. And on paper, if you have cancer, that would be a mark against you, right? Like, if you've had a serious illness in you or your family's life, that's
it's your fault.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your fault. And I don't know if I want to marry into that family.
Right.
Because it's a mark against you.
Yeah.
So I was always joke. I'm like, oh God, if I was in India and part of that time, like, who knows? I might not be marriageable anymore, And so I think there's just, again, all these things that are conditioned in us that we don't even realize.
Yeah. Yeah. When the kind of licensure then of people seeing how almost liberating of an experience this is, have you found others who have been like, wow, Sheetal, man, I really appreciate that. It sort of sparks and ignites more and more openness amongst not only the community of creators, but just, folks in general?
I think it's important. When I was going through treatment, I didn't talk about it publicly until I was ready to talk about it, because I was going through my own kind of process for it.
Yeah.
And then when I did talk about it publicly, I remember it was about 6 months after I was diagnosed, and I was in the heart of chemotherapy. So I had lost all my hair, but a lot of people didn't know, what was going on with me. And I remember I had gotten a request to shoot the cover of a magazine. And it had gone through my reps, and my reps sent it to me, asking me if I was interested. And I was reading what they wrote, and I called my manager, and I'm like, I don't think that they know that I have no hair. Just from like the way that they're writing to me, like because all the vision boards and like the inspirational like the ideas they had for the shoot, I was like, I'm not going to look like that. Like, I don't think that they realize that I'm bald and that I'm actually going through chemotherapy. And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'll do it if they let me be me. And I'm not going to wear a wig, and I'll just just be bald. And if we can celebrate that as also feminine, I think that's a really important message to put out there, especially for Indian women. Hair is a thing for us. It was a thing for me. It was really hard to lose my hair, but to embrace femininity in a way that isn't connected to that, I think is so important. And so they actually, kudos to them, said, absolutely, no problem. And we did. And that cover is so, I think, iconic for a lot of South Asian women, because you've never seen the cover of a magazine with like an Indian woman with no hair.
Yeah.
And so I was really proud of that they agreed to do that.
I wonder if like the layers of authenticity just need to get magnified that much more, right? So like, look, this is what cancer looks like. This is what parenting looks like. This is what it's like to actually share these conversations with your kids, and granting ourselves a little bit more, openness to be able to actually look at people who are going through real things, mental health, mental hygiene in those situations, rather than the kind of highlight reel that we always see on social media.
100%. I mean, I think that's the stuff that people connect to,
Yeah.
is the authentic, like the joke of, as a parent, like, can you get as a mom, can you get a moment to yourself? I mean, I can't even go take a shower without my children coming in. I'm like, just
Right.
give me 3 minutes. There are 5 other adults outside,
Yeah.
but still, it's got to be me, and
It's
it's
gotta
got to
be
be in
you,
it. And
right.
I always say, is it an emergency? Well, I'm so hungry. I need a snack. You know, the idea, like, it's so funny, and again, those are the things that people relate to, because we all deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. In those parenting moments versus like, hey, what's it like to have to be a parent when you're nauseous? You've just gone through chemotherapy, and your kids are asking for the same things. It's not like puppies and rainbows all the time.
No, and they're 2 and 4. I mean, I will tell you, it was really hard. I had a double mastectomy. I was not allowed to hug my children for like 6 months. Try to tell that to a 2 or a 4-year-old.
Do you think that now that your kids are older, now that you're talking to more and more children in schools and they're looking at these stories, do you think it's going to make a difference once the children realize this, that their parents are having aha moments also?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that it goes both ways, but I do think that it's important for kids to see their parents as humans. This idea of, like, when we get older and we start to get to know our parents as people is a rite of passage, I think, sometimes as a child. But I think the earlier you can do that, and for them to see what a relationship looks like, what a partnership looks like, that some days are hard, that some days are good, and all of those things, just so they know that this is life. Like, they need to see that.
I imagine that a lot of artists and actors and authors and creators are so drawn to storytelling, which clearly has been a talent and a gift for you. I'm curious if there's a different level of empathy that's involved in each different area of expression. So, like, this is very different from, say, the acting arena, or yet there actually quite a lot of similarity there?
There is a lot more similarity than you would think. And it's because at the end of the day, for me, it's about telling stories. And so what was interesting is writing. A lot of it was the same process as me getting into a character, because I'm creating characters, I'm creating worlds, I'm creating stories, and I need to do that for all of the roles that I play.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of similarity in at least my approach, because at the end of the day, I'm telling stories. And I have the privilege of creating characters that then I put out into the world.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with author Sheetal Sheth. Stay tuned. Every story told is a lesson learned, and every lesson learned is a story waiting to be told. I'm Abhay, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians so everyone can say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hello, I am Odissi dance artist Bijoyini Satpathy, and you are listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing with Abhay Dandekar.
Welcome back to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin our conversation with Sheetal Sheth. Do you think that the empathy you have for kids and families, or the empathy you have for a character you're portraying, do you have to prepare any differently in there, or is that also kind of a similar lane that you
It's
have to
very
be in?
similar, because you really have to put yourself in that person's shoes, literally, to write it or to be it. I mean, I'm in my books, I'm writing it. So, and it's funny, as an actor, it's so funny. You always want to be like, I want to talk to the writer. Like, what did they mean by this? So for me, in that case, I'm doing both.
Yeah. How's that felt? I mean, in the sense of, for you to be able to now create more and more stories for children and families, a very specific, unique audience. And in the same way, some of your roles where you're portraying or in South Asian stories, do you feel like these are sort of naturals for you? Like, it's not sort of a heavy lift.
I mean, I find all writing to be really hard. It does not come easy to me.
Sure.
I just think, and most authors will say that, like, it's just hard.
Yeah.
But I will say I write about real things. And so in terms of ideas, I have many ideas. I have pages of ideas. But then getting that idea, executed in a way that you feel confident that can, obviously be a story, is a whole other skill. my whole life, it's so, I always joke that like I started in this business when brown was not cool.
Yeah.
And in the 90s, it was a very different experience being an actor, much that most people don't realize and that we don't talk enough about, because I think it's important to know where we've come from. And so I've always been really proud of where I come from. And I've always kind of been very outspoken about who I am and where I come from. And so that's never been like, that hasn't been an issue for me. I've
Sure.
always been very kind of clear and centered about who I am. I talk about how people wanted me to change my name. It was constantly coming up. That was never a question for me.
Yeah.
We have many colleagues that have. Fine. Everyone's, path is different. But like those things, they always just made me sad, because I was like, really? That's really how you look at the world? But I never subscribed to it. And
Yeah.
so I think a little bit for me has been, I've taken a different path, maybe one that doesn't seem as bright and shiny as some of the other people who do what I do, but it's always been very authentic and
Yeah.
very much staying true to who I am.
And I wonder if there is any different nuance to storytelling, particularly for a South Asian, and for that matter, a South Asian American audience, because the experience is still evolving. It's not sort of uniform. There isn't sort of a one size fits all at all.
Well, we're not a monolith.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the issue, is that what happens is, in terms of media, is that, and we're still, I mean, it's gotten better, but when the majority of people green lighting or buying are white, they're looking at kind of us as like, okay, well, we got the Diwali book, we
Yeah.
got the Holi book, we got the Mandi book. And you're like, that we don't just sit around in saris and bindis all day. And that was really, I mean, that's what started me writing the Anjali books, because I was
Yeah.
looking for books for my kids. And I was like, do they know that we like go to school and play instruments and play sports and do
Yeah.
all the same things? I was so kind of taken aback at like the only books I found were based on cultural experiences or holidays or religion.
Yeah.
And again, that's because, and interestingly enough, when I was selling my Anjali books, many of these big publishers were like, it's not Indian enough.
Yeah.
And I would say, well, why? What does that mean to you? Because their idea of what being Indian is that they want us to teach as opposed to just let us be. And that has always been something I found with my books, with my movies, with everything. And I have no interest in teaching you that I have a right to exist in this planet. I'm
Right.
just going to be me, and you can come along for the ride and you will connect, because guess what? I grew up watching all the same movies that you were making, and I connected, because at the end of the day, these are universal experiences. And so the specific comes from the universal. And so it's still happening. I mean, I joke even now, I'm like, do they know that we don't just have like everything I see are like about weddings, arranged marriages, it's like still going through the same kind of narratives that I'm kind of bored by, and I really want to get past. But and it's not about not having them, it's about having enough room for all of the stories.
Sure. And I mean, when people ask that question, like, hey, it's great, but it's not Indian enough, does the reaction now somehow get better just because there's more content out there? Or do we just have to keep, answering in the same way? It's just like, well, it doesn't matter if you don't think it's Indian enough.
But the thing is, not everyone answers in the same way. And so I think in our community, right, there's, and that's good. Like, we all have different points of view and we all come at it from a different way. I feel that I am not the majority.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of, and there's a lot of benefit in people would say, well, just get the thing made. And then the next one you can do that. Fine.
Right.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Sure.
But it's just never been the way that I have operated.
You've been, like you said, you've had a front row seat to this and an actor for many, many years now.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you think that, again, that same kind of lack of or presence of institutional memory in American media, in Hollywood, that builds. So like, it sounds like from what you think, it's not been sort of building from one step to the other, and perhaps the same kind of successes and challenges and questions are kind of perpetuated, whether it's like from the 90s or now.
Well, I think it's also because as a community, I think we're a newer community, right? Like in terms of when we came to the country, we didn't come here till the 60s or 70s. So we're still like, 2-3 generations, and some other communities have been here longer.
Yeah.
And I think that we are not as organized as some of the other communities have in terms of having institutions and groups and people who like do the work.
Sure.
I think we're starting to see that, and I'm involved in many of them, but they haven't been around for that long. And I think there's just a lot more work to be done in that way.
When you think and reflect a little bit on your books and the Anjali series and now Making Happy, what makes you optimistic about our community and kind of the work that you're doing, and in some ways not just optimistic but proud?
Well, there's what's nice is to see that it doesn't, I hope, from what I've heard and what I've seen in the industry, because the books have done so well, is that they're not considered just for one community. And at the end of the day, that's the point, is that when, I was just at a book festival 2 days ago, and kids just were like, oh my God, that's such a beautiful book. And they just pick it up. They don't care. They just want a good story and they want to have fun art. And at the end of the day, they will connect to whatever piece of that story it is. And so there is no such thing as boy books and girl books. There's no such thing as books for Indian children or books for Latin children, or whatever. Like, now, do I think it's important to have every community see themselves as the hero of books? 100%. And that's important. But at the end of the day, the stories need to be good and they need to matter and they need to be read by everybody.
With you now wearing, so many hats and succeeding in a lot of areas, first off, that's awesome. I love this idea of, these stories are meant to be universal because the aspects that they're speaking about are universal. But now that you've had sort of success in a lot of different arena of art and expression and storytelling, do you see yourself as a role model? Do you embrace that?
I've never really never connected to it in the way that I think people mean it.
Sure.
But I'm super proud of the work that I do, and I'm unapologetic about it. And a lot of times when I write children's books, it's different. But when I started out in the 90s, I was doing movies that had never been done before, and they were way ahead of their time. And I was playing characters that, especially the South Asian community, were not ready for and unable to digest, and they were very uncomfortable with. And many of them felt were inappropriate.
Sure.
Whereas we're like, we need to be talking about these things, So in terms of, LGBTQ communities, in terms of having a hard time with your parents, in terms of mental health, when I look back at my movies, I'm so proud at the breadth and depth of them, and also that we did them at those times. Now, they were ahead of their time, but I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of much vitriol, where people have, said many nasty things to me because of the work that I've done. But I have never wavered from being very proud and unapologetic about the roles that I choose to do.
And in some ways, do you find that because there's some vanguard element to this, because it's sort of more of a pathfinder or trailblazing, if you will, that's the natural byproduct of it, that people will either see that like, wow, what a great, trailblazer or role model here, or that there's also some, I wouldn't say risk, but that's a natural reaction to it.
Maybe. I wish that people didn't necessarily have as much vitriol as I've experienced. Maybe it is. Maybe it's inevitable. I don't know. Again, if we come at it, like I say, with the sense of like understanding and this idea, it's like the way you choose to receive something is really up to us. Yep. And so I think this all just circles back to our conversation of like, what are we missing in what we're teaching our kids? Because then when we're adults, we see the same mistakes repeat themselves.
Well, hopefully all of these things are resonating for so many young people, parents, multi-generations. Sheetal, thank you so much for joining us today. What a treat.
Thank you. I so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much, Sheetal. And Making Happy is available everywhere, so please check it out along with Sheetal's other books. Please remember to help support breast cancer screening and awareness, as this is a particularly rising trend in the global South Asian population. So start the conversation with your healthcare provider and get support for early examination and screening. Till next time, I'm Abhay.